Well, hello there, and welcome back to another episode of Three Guys in the Word. My name is Andrew Ulmer. It's good to be back once again with fellow brothers in Christ. Chris Miller and Eric Parker were members of the Taylorsville Road Church of Christ. It's great to be able to continue our study in the Book of Esther. It's been a few weeks, but it's great to be back in the saddle, so to speak, and get back into this study. Been looking forward to it. It's good to see fellow brothers that been along for this ride and looking to dig in, but just we'll do what we normally do and see how everybody's doing. How are things going with you, Chris?
Well, it's my fault we haven't been able to record because my schedule is absolutely changed completely. But I get to see you guys more, which to me makes that worth it. And been able to sit in Eric's class on Ezekiel on Sunday mornings, really getting a lot out of that, which I already told him that. And then Andrew did a really good job Wednesday night in his class too. So it's really good to be at Taylorsville Road. I mean, I'm gonna brag on you all right now because I have the right to do that now since I am a member there. But I'm completely recharged from being there, and I appreciate all that you guys do, and I appreciate you letting me be a part of this with you guys. I know we've been doing it for quite a while, um, but it's still nice to be able to teach and preach in a sense, and get to do it alongside you guys. So really looking forward to today. Have missed doing this the last couple of weeks, but really looking forward to our discussion today. How you doing, Eric?
I'm good. Yeah, you've gone through some big changes lately. So very thankful to have more opportunities to serve together and yeah, just navigating life, living the dream. My kids are healthy, I'm healthy, my wife's healthy. We just actually finished our family study on Isaiah, so that was kind of a big undertaking. We do a chapter at a time. So 66 nights of reading. We do that at dinner time. Um, and we have a little discussion about the chapter that we read. We're going to move into a topical study for a few weeks about how siblings relate to one another. And
Hmm.
you can just imagine all the catalysts that went into that study and choosing that one. And then we'll go back to the prophets. We'll study Jeremiah next, Lord willing. But yeah, just navigating life. But very thankful for God's rich blessings and last week got to marry somebody or got to officiate the marriage of somebody. I've been married to somebody for 13 years. I got to officiate the marriage of somebody. And it was funny. Dorcas, who's one of our members from Nigeria, she asked about because I think Marcia had said something like that, like Eric's gonna marry somebody. Because that's kind of the language that we use
Yeah.
sometimes. Um, and she's like, he's already married. Like so it's just funny. Um, I got to officiate the wedding of somebody, so that was really, really great. I forgot their marriage certificate, so I had to drive all the way back, back to the house, and that was a whole undertaking. It was like over an hour away, but they were leaving on their honeymoon and just a whole bunch of things. Um, so that was quite an adventure last weekend. But thankful that we have the opportunity to get back into Esther. Yeah, I missed it too. So I agree wholeheartedly with my brother Chris here, but looking forward to it. Andrew, you all right? How you doing?
Well, today is a good day. And anytime that we have the opportunity to open up our eyes and have that mindset that, hey, God's giving me another day, that's just a beautiful thing. And I need things like this to remind me of that fact because I could take for granted, oh, I just open up my eyes, I could get up in and just sort of go through the routine of life. But when we gather together in this type of avenue, and I'm not trying to speak as if, using um, sort of the preacher talk or whatever, but just the reality of things. It just puts in perspective. And I need that constant reminder and it's just a blessing to be able to gather with other individuals and connect, um, because the devil wants us isolated. I know that that's in my experience, and it's good to be able just to connect, at least in some way. We're not physically in the same room, but we are seeking to connect nonetheless, and really connect into God's word. So looking forward to that. Um, Before we got on for our program, Eric had mentioned he was able to get some running in, and made me think of, well, I'm grateful that I was able to get some exercise in already, um, 4 times this week. And I'm glad that that's a go. And hopefully, Lord willing, I can push it even further, to do more and do healthy things like what we're doing now. So, having said all that, Chris, would you be so kind as to remind us of what our principal verses are? And then it's been a little bit. Why don't you share, and we'll go around like we do each time, just like a minute or two briefly, talking about what we covered last time, like what were our thoughts from our last video.
So our principal verses we've been using for Esther is Esther 4, verses 13 through 14. It says, and Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your own heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? So, like you said, it has been a while since we have been together to look at this book, but I do think that it's interesting, really, kind of how things have played out. Nothing happens by accident. Queen Vashti is removed, and a vacancy, I guess you could say, is opened, and Esther ends up stepping into this vacancy. And she really was prepared for the time such as this. God had appointed, I believe, her to step into this role when she did, because ultimately, as we're going to continue to see from the end of the book, if she wasn't in that role, her people would have been in very great peril. And the reason why that is because of Haman, who we spent most of our time talking about last time. He was a wicked man. You think of being anti-Semitic, that was Haman. He just did not dislike, let's say, one Jew. His whole plan was to destroy the Jews, to destroy the nation. And as we talked about with the king, Ahasuerus, very easily manipulated. Haman manipulates him, just like he was manipulated in chapter 1, just like he was manipulated in chapter 2. We can kind of see a pattern of him being in the role of a king, but not really providing any type of leadership. And that's something that I've really taken away from our text that we've looked at so far. Mordecai, we talked about him a little bit last time, of his refusal to bow before Haman, which infuriates Haman even more. That kind of expedites Haman's plan. He wants us to be taken care of, and he wants these Jews to be exterminated from existence. So you think of Esther being in this position with a foreign power being in charge. She's there for a purpose and a reason. And the fascinating thing about the Book of Esther, that I know we all probably know, is God is not specifically mentioned, but you can't read this story and not see God's fingerprints all over this. So Haman's a major character, Mordecai a major character, Esther, obviously, the book bears her name. But really, we're going to continue to see kind of this animosity of Haman drive him to the point where his pride, his anger, his fury is ultimately going to try to exterminate the Jews. And we're going to see God's hand of providence take care of his people once again, like we see time and time again. What'd you get from our last discussion, Eric?
We talked about Esther and kind of the reversal of her story. She was an orphan, and she was an object of much pity on the part of Mordecai, and Mordecai taking her into his house, and the reversal of fortune, as a maybe pagan would say, but reversal of circumstances nonetheless. Um, and Esther gets, of course, uh, she stands out for being beautiful, for being virtuous, and she ends up ascending to the throne. Some of the things that she had to deal with were oppressive and humiliating, and probably misogynistic, quite misogynistic, given Ahasuerus's beauty pageant, and the various things that went into all of that. But you, on the one hand, you think, okay, Esther's situation has changed quite a bit. She's in the palace now. That's going to be a lot better. But as Chris brought out, a lot of these Persian rulers were, um, in the Bible, they're presented as being quite inept. In history, you do see that they have certain talents and skill sets. It's not that every decision they ever made was really bad, but the Bible highlights these catastrophic decisions that led to terrible circumstances. And so that, you know, we have to understand the Bible is not giving the whole picture, but it is giving the picture as it relates to Judaism. And oftentimes, of course, the Jews have been quite oppressed by people and enemies. And that's, of course, true of anybody who believes in the one true God, Christians included. We're going to be mocked. The opening ceremonies of the Olympics, is a great illustration of that. Just open mockery of Christians. Even though there are, I think I saw 2.5 billion espousing Christians in the world. Now that number is probably grossly inflated because of certain things, but it's just open season on people who believe in God. And of course, even in the 20th century with Hitler and his anti-Semitism. And of course, Hitler wasn't just acting on his own either. I mean, he had a whole nation and other nations, a whole Axis alliance who supported his endeavors and supported the extermination of the Jews, the extermination of people who are disabled, the extermination of minorities, you name it, eugenics. So that's probably getting too far afield, but the idea is that Esther's situation has changed, but that doesn't mean that all the problems are going to go away. In fact, her situation changing for the better creates more problems in the case of Haman in particular. But Mordecai stands out. We do have some questions about why he did what he did, why he didn't do what he didn't do, why he told Esther to keep her cultural connection to Israel a secret. That's a point that's reiterated there in chapter 2 towards the end there in verses 19 and 20. And then Mordecai foils an assassination plot towards the end of chapter 2. Then we get into Haman, as Chris said. Haman has this agenda, his axe to grind, not just against Mordecai, but he takes Mordecai's decisions and actually projects it onto the whole people. And so he wants to exterminate an entire group of people, the Israelites, the Jewish people. He wants to exterminate them. So it's a great illustration of how anger and vengeance is never satisfied. And that's why we're told to stay away from it and to cope with anger and to allay and alleviate anger before the sun sets, because the wrath of God, the wrath of man does not accomplish the purposes of God. And to give vengeance to God and let him do what he needs to do. But of course, Esther shows us that that doesn't negate our responsibilities, as our key text says in chapter 4 there. Mordecai is like, don't just kind of count on something to just happen. You have to sort of drive that, and God will bring about change. Of course, he doesn't use the name God, as Chris pointed out, but that's the point. Deliverance will come from somewhere. And of course, for a Jew, that's going to come from the one true God. Andrew?
I was just thinking that, and I think we may have covered this, but I believe Haman is probably a descendant of the Amalekites. And you get a sense of irony. If the Jews had done what they were supposed to have done, eradicated the Canaanites, as they were commanded to do by God, this wouldn't have been an issue. So it's like the past coming back to haunt you when you don't do something you're supposed to do. I know that seems offensive to the world. Like, that's not how God is supposed to be. God is love. And I mean, these were very immoral people. And it mentions Agagite. What happened with Agag? Um, Samuel was a servant of God who slew him, took his life because King Saul refused to do so. And that was a righteous act. I know that's hard for us to even imagine those things happen, but you're sort of seeing like, okay, the Jews were supposed to eradicate the evil, wicked Canaanites, and now, and that included the Amalekites. And now you're seeing, okay, the opposite trying to happen, the reversal. And so you can see those connections being made. And say, if you don't do what God asks, it'll come back to haunt you at some time later down the road. And so it's best for us to listen and pay attention for our own good and to be obedient to what he has asked us to do. So I just thought I would add that. And let's start looking further as to what Haman's plan is and what may transpire or what would end up transpiring. Eric, if you don't mind beginning in verse 12 of chapter 3, and let's read through verse 3 of chapter 4.
Esther 3, starting in verse 12. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and it was written just as Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, and to the princes of each people, each province according to its script, each people according to its language, being written in the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to seize their possessions as plunder. A copy of the edict to be issued as law in every province was published to all the peoples, so that they should be ready for this day. The couriers went out impelled by the king's command, while the decree was issued at the citadel in Susa, and while the king and Haman sat down to drink, the city of Susa was in confusion. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. He went as far as the king's gate, for no one was to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. In each and every province where the command and decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, while fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth, or on sackcloth and ashes. So get another time reference. We know that Haman was very methodical in what he was trying to do. This is anger and this is vengeance, but it's also we might say shrewdness. He's being very methodical in the way that he wants to dismantle the entire Jewish population and what he has done. The king has already given him a ring, and under the pretense of there's a people in your kingdom, Lord, who's going to they don't submit to our laws, which I think Chris had pointed out is the same accusation against Jesus. And we need to get rid of them. And the king's like, okay, he doesn't ask any questions, and he gives them the signet ring. He says, take care of business. And Haman, it's almost like it's an overstatement, starting in verse 12. You can see just how long that is, and then verse 13, and just the descriptive language of it all. This is going everywhere. Haman is making sure that every single person in the Persian Empire knows that we have to kill every single Jewish person that there is. It's just emphatic and just thorough. And the way that he does this, it's gross, it's disgusting. And of course, this is planned for, a certain day, and one day, the 13th day of the 12th month. This is now the 13th day of the first month when the messengers are going out. So you actually have like a whole year of build up to this, which I find to be really fascinating. A year of just this dread, immense dread on the part of the Jewish population. That's almost worse than the actual destruction itself, if that could be, compared. But it certainly aggravates the whole situation. And you can see from the last verse in chapter 3 why there's so much confusion in Susa. It's like you're gonna eliminate an entire people group. Um, this it, this is genocide. How did this even happen? Um, And again, all the while, Mordecai was the one who foiled the king's plot, and he's just kind of swept aside. Now that's going to come back around later on, and it's going to be a big catalyst for the resolution of all this. But Haman's the one he's the one that's exalted and lifted up. When Mordecai really should have been the one who was exalted, and that happens a lot, as the people who do the good things and who deserve the pay raises and all those sorts of things are the ones who get overlooked because of a variety of different things. But this would have been heavy situation. In verses 1 through 3, of course, you have not just the people's response in general, but Mordecai's response. He goes out into the midst of the city, goes right out in front of everybody, and he is just distraught. He's weeping and he's wailing and bemoaning everything that's going on. He's torn his clothes. He's thrown ashes on himself, and he's sitting on sackcloth. It's just, he goes to the very king's gate. And actually, we have something that's said there in verse 2: no one was to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. We have things outside of the scriptures that tell us that. We know from Persian archives and history and that sort of thing, that people weren't supposed to cross that gate. So it is a nice confirmation of what we're seeing here. But he is distraught. And again, you get a very emphatic portrait of everything that's going on in verse 3. In each and every province where the command and the decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, fasting, weeping, wailing, sackcloth, ashes. I mean, it's a very emphatic portrait, and how appropriate. I mean, if you heard that your entire people group are going to be destroyed, that is completely distressing. I mean, it's hard enough to deal with personal destruction or the destruction of a loved one, but to have an entire people group exterminated, and there's a whole year of buildup to it. How could the king let this happen? How could it's the end of the world? It's exactly what maybe Christians have felt from time to time, and you see that even today. Boko Haram, I think a few years ago, they were just beheading Christians openly on the internet, and just saying, any Christian we come across, we're going to kill them. And just how gross and how genocidal this is. I mean, these people are maniacs. Chris?
I think it's like you said, do you think genocide enough is bad? But when you have a year buildup of it, that's, obviously genocide's bad. Acting rashly towards genocide's bad, but you can't act like this is something rash. This is pre-planned. And as a Jew, I can't imagine how you would feel counting down those days of knowing that this is coming down the line. This is going to happen to you. And I think that's why you see Mordecai's reaction, because he's privy to this information. He hears this information, and he tears his clothes. But I think, to me, verse 15 of chapter 3 really kind of drives the point home. The king and Haman sat down to drink after this was proclaimed. So it's like, how sick of an individual can you be to take the king's signet ring, make this decree, and then you just sit down and celebrate it? It's like that's what type of individual the Jewish people are having to deal with here. This is who Mordecai, right? Maybe it's like you said, Eric, why would Mordecai not bow down? Maybe Mordecai knew how he was and was just like, I ain't bowing down to this guy. And he shows how he was by the way he conducts himself with this. And then you think of the king. It's like I'd brought up when we were kind of summarizing everything. The king is so easily manipulated. For him, maybe he views this as, it's like we talked, like Eric had brought up with Jesus, the chief leaders and the scribes and the elders and the Pharisees use that same rationale with with Pilate and with the Romans. Hey, this guy doesn't follow your rules. He's not going to obey your commands. You know, he's a king. He's trying to usurp authority from you. Well, Haman does that, and there's no remorse at all that we get from this. And I think really the two big things from this that I get is number one, sometimes the figurehead or the one speaking is not necessarily the issue or the problem, maybe. There's a lot of times people that work behind the scenes that do things a lot of times that manipulate those individuals. Haman is a perfect example of this. Now, obvious on Ahasuerus too, because you'd think as the king, you would be wise enough to say, what are you talking about? This isn't the right thing. But then, you know, the other thing is, it's like you'd mentioned, Eric, with Christians, the Jews are God's people at this point. They constantly faced threats of extermination at times throughout their existence. I know you had brought up, I think it was this past Sunday, talking about that remnant in Ezekiel, talking about the remnant that we see time and time again. And it goes back to that messianic prophecy that was given. While there was concern about them possibly being exterminated, God had made the promise that through Abraham all nations would be blessed. And God is not going to break that promise. He's not going to give up on that promise that he had made. So I think that's where it's really helpful when we read throughout the Old Testament into the New Testament, these promises that were given, God planned on keeping these promises. And really, he shows his providence and his care throughout the book of Esther and other books as well to show that I'm keeping my promise. Now, the Jews had put themselves in this position of being in captivity due to their disobedience, but God is going to protect them from this threat, from this decree that Haman hands out. So, and I know I kind of went around in circles there, but you think about it, as bad as Haman is, and as unaware as Ahasuerus is, God is still in control, and God is going to keep his promise, and God's will is going to be accomplished. And the amazing thing is as bad as this seems at the moment, when we get to the end of the book, we're going to see that God can take this terrible circumstance and ultimately use it for his good. And who else could do that other than God? I'm very impressed by that already that we've seen throughout the book of Esther. We got Andrew.
Just thinking that it almost seems as the king is like indifferent, apathetic, like whatever, totally dismissive of the um whole situation. Almost reminds me of the church at Laodicea, very lukewarm, like not useful for anything. And whereas Haman is like hot with hatred towards Jews and wants to completely wipe them out. He does get what he wants, and he can sort of say like you can almost imagine like victory, drinking to victory, and the king is back to sort of uh, well, at least satisfied somebody or whatever. It's another problem resolved. I mean, I care less about okay, you handle kill everybody if you want of this people, whatever. That don't matter. And when it says the city of Susa was in confusion, I one part of me really wants to know when they hear this edict, not just the Jews, obviously, would be very distressed and like Mordecai in despair that there were people that had hearts there that you mean that you're going to actually destroy women and children as well, like the ones that are totally helpless, and that doesn't sound right at all. You would think and can imagine there's got to be people with hearts, with an ounce of humanity in them that surely this can't be right. I mean, there's got to be some kind of mistake that is happening. This sounds absolutely insane. And it is insane that there would be an order that just because someone who, I'm not saying that they would know, okay, this guy's ego was bruised and he's going to make this insane plot. And it does get, at least where we're reading right now, it's like a for sure thing that's going to happen. We haven't got to yet what will happen, but it looks like, hey, it's a done deal. And we know it's not going to be a done deal, but it's just amazing how bad sin, and we can't dismiss it as far as where it could take somebody. You see how just one thing, one in the grand scheme of life, this man's ego was hurt. And that's all it took for him to say, you know what, I'm not going to just take his life. I'm going to be as of what he did. You're the reason why I'm going to make sure that everyone else suffers, that you know and care about, all your people. Does that even sound like a hint of anyone with any type of rational mindset? I mean, you would want to not be near that person. That person needs to be locked away, because there is not a lot going on there that is there's no sound mind there. They are really gone. They have allowed sin to totally corrupt them. They've allowed Satan to take over their life. And we're going to just see just what ends up happening to a person when they allow sin to just take over their lives. So it's really ramping up and ramping up fast. And that would be just so cruel. Every day thinking about this, worrying and panicking about the impending doom. It's like you know the date of your death. And some people ask, would you rather know or not know? And we won't get into that, but it's like people's like, okay, we know when we're all going to die. But the whole story has not yet been written for them. There's still more to come. Not all hope is lost. So let's pick up in verse 4, if you would, Chris, and read to through verse 12.
So Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her, and the queen was deeply distressed. Then she sent garments to clothe Mordecai and to take his sackcloth away from him, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend her, and she gave him a command concerning Mordecai to learn what and why this was. So Hatcheth went out to Mordecai in the city square that was in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasury to destroy the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the written decree for the destruction, which was given in Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and that he might command her to go into the king and make supplication to him and plead before him for her people. So Hatcheth returned and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Then Esther spoke to Hatcheth and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court of the king, who has not been called, he has but one law, put all to death except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words. So it's like this whole time, don't tell anybody who you are. Now this threat happens, go beg for us, which I think is going to put her in an interesting predicament because he's given this decree. Well, she's a Jew. It doesn't say, oh, except Queen Esther, which he didn't know that she was a Jew. She hadn't revealed that yet. But now it's like this is really a big deal. And I almost wonder, you think of like verse 4, like Mordecai's deeply distressed. He's deeply distressed. She's like, all right, I'll send him some new garments. We'll take away his sackcloth. He'll be fine. And then it's like, no, I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to quit mourning. This is extremely serious. And you have to wonder how serious Mordecai was mourning to turn that away. And I think that it wasn't just, it's like you had mentioned, I think it was Andrew had mentioned it. Mordecai's directly involved in this conflict with Haman. The rest of the Jews are a byproduct of Haman's anger towards Mordecai. So they may be like, why in the world is this being decreed? Why is this being sent out? Mordecai knows why. He understands why. He knows that it's come from Haman. And with that weeping and grief, I almost wonder if maybe he feels guilty for not bowing down. Maybe he puts a lot of the blame on himself, and that's why he's grieving to such an extent, as if my actions are going to cause an extermination of all my people, and all this weight is bared on me. It doesn't tell us that in that, but I think that's human nature. I think that in an extent, he may feel that that's all on him. But you see this back and forth where, Esther's communicating through the eunuch to Mordecai. Mordecai's communicating back. And Esther, it seems, from what I just read, she kind of doesn't know what's going on. And Mordecai's like, especially in verse 8, gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, that it would be shown to Esther and explained to her. So it's like Mordecai's like, this is a legitimate threat. It's a legitimate decree. This is a legitimate circumstance that's about to happen. And it's presented to Esther. And Esther, Mordecai's like, go beg for the king, beg for mercy from the king. And Esther's in a really bad situation here, because if she reveals who she is in the decree. If she doesn't reveal who she is, all of her people, including Mordecai, who raised her in the absence of her parents, perishes. So it's like for Esther in this situation, God's put her in this role. And like you had brought up, Eric, it's great that she's in this role, but this role now has become very complicated for her, because it's one of those situations, which I'm sure we've all felt this way. If I'm Esther, I'm in a no-win situation here. I could go to the king and die myself. If I don't go to the king, I'm going to have to live with the knowledge that I have that my people are going to be exterminated and I didn't do anything. So it's a catch-22. So it's like, I want to be in a position of authority. I want to be in an influential role. Sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for too, because sometimes you're put in situations where you have to operate and you may not know what to do. But the thing that I really get from this is Mordecai is deeply distressed. I think Esther wants to help Mordecai because she loves him. Once she gets the decree, she wants to do something, but she's in a really bad position and she doesn't know what to do, which I think in a way is kind of comforting too, because we get in that situation too, where sometimes we are very conflicted on what we do, how we operate in a situation or circumstance. And that's one of those situations where you definitely go to God in prayer and ask for guidance. Because she's in a really bad spot here. And no matter what she does, she's probably going to have concerns either way she goes. But really bad situation here. And you feel for her and you feel for Mordecai too, because they both are now aware of what's going to happen. What you got, Eric?
A big question that I have is, what has Esther been doing? She's not been called before the king for 30 days. She apparently is oblivious to what's happening. What has she been doing? And that there may be a simple answer to that. There may be a more complex answer to that. But, at the end of the day, what are we doing in our lives? And are we really focusing on the things that are important, or are we missing stuff? And that's something that we can all apply to our own lives is, are we just sort of oblivious to the real core issues that are happening because we've sort of built a little bubble or a hedge around us and sort of missed out. So, I'll take that for what it's worth. But, that Mordecai is obviously visibly upset, and he's at the king's gate. He's been at the king's gate before, right? He was there in chapter 2 a couple times. Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate in verse 19. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, he finds out about that plot. He's been at the king's gate before. Where's Esther been? She's just been, I don't know, in the gardens, or like, what has she been doing? And so I don't know. But the messengers come to Esther and say, your uncle's out there and he's visibly upset. And or my cousin, he's very upset at what's going on. And you need to talk to him and figure out what's going on. And Esther's like, well, just we'll give him some clothes, and he'll be fine. It just pull yourself together, man. It's like, well, and again, you get the impression that she doesn't even know. She's just like, he's just throwing a fit for some reason, and maybe he feels like I've neglected him or whatever. I'll send him some clothes. We'll make nice. And of course, Hathach goes to him and says, well, here's all this stuff. And Mordecai turns it down, and he apparently has to go out of his way to inform Esther about what's going on. He gets a copy of the decree, and the irony here is that the decree has gone everywhere in the Persian Empire. That's the point. It's gone to every territory. It's gone to every satrap, every governor. It's been everywhere except here at Susa in the palace, because Esther didn't even know what's going on. And so they bring, of course, that to her. Mordecai has to inform her again about all the situation, the money, and he knows all the specific details about it. He knows all the plot that went into all this. And I think it is interesting. Chris brought out a curious point of thought about, was he sort of blaming himself? I think that is in human nature. Again, we don't know. He has enough reason to be upset without that, but human nature would be that, you start blaming yourself. If I just would have bent my waist a little bit, if I would have kind of tipped my hat at the guy, would that have resulted in the salvation of all my people? Well, probably not. Haman seems like he was just looking for an opportunity to exploit other people. And you do wonder if Haman has had some bad interactions, bad dealings with the Jews previous to this. Maybe a few times something like this has happened. And maybe that's why he gets beyond Mordecai, beyond the vengeance for Mordecai personally, and he just wants to take care of all the Jews and get rid of them. So again, this may tap into that Agagite reference too with the Amalekites, like Andrew had brought up earlier. Mordecai is a representative of Kish and Benjamin and the line of Saul, King Saul, and kind of connected to that. And then you've got the Amalekite line through Agag with Haman. So you do have an interesting dynamic there. Is this something that's kind of been an intergenerational prejudice that has played up over time? Maybe it's not even just Haman's life, but it's Haman's father and his grandfather have had bad dealings with Jews. And it's created this thorough prejudice, this very deep prejudice that wasn't just isolated at one thing, but that was maybe the thing that kind of tipped it over the edge. Now I'm going to do something about this, because he is so methodical. Typically with one person, you probably would react pretty quickly. Somebody yells at you, you yell back at them. But if there's been multiple generations of this, there's been a whole story dynamic a whole historical dynamic between these two families, these two groups of people, that maybe would help us to understand why this gets so escalated so quickly. But kind of coming back to here, again, the request is made, but the language here is Mordecai is going to order her to go in. It's a very strong word. It's not like, could you please just go, maybe think about going into the king. It's like, no, you got to go now. And there's, again, just a very strong reaction in trying to deal with this and resolve this. And the faster they resolve this, the better. Because as that D-Day approaches, it's going to be more and more pressure. And Esther's going to kind of waffle a little bit. I don't want to die. And of course, Mordecai is going to be like, well, you need to pull yourself together. And do what's right, regardless of the consequences. You need to do what's right. But yeah, this situation has escalated, and so you do wonder if there's been more of a backdrop that has escalated these things further. Andrew?
Part of me wants to know if Esther has been sort of, I'm going to not try to rock the boat at all. I'm going to kind of stay clear of as much as possible, because it almost seems like she's isolated herself and cut herself off from pretty much anything. Maybe possibly with what happened previously with Vashti. And I'm gonna not try to stir the pot. And when she mentions verse 11, which you almost get a sense that it was a legitimate reason, but rather looking at it from the another side, it's just an excuse. If we're being honest, I truly believe that she's afraid and doesn't want to, as it's already been mentioned. I'm like, okay, if I do this, I know for certain I'm going to die. But we're going to see if I don't do it, I may die anyway. And or if I somehow get spared, maybe down the road I'll find out anyway that someone will know that, hey, I'm a Jew. And so sometimes we have to get out of our comfort zone and speak up and do the right thing. And even though we don't want to, and sometimes it takes literally being up against the wall, or someone really like pushing us to get out there and do something where we're in the position and no one else is in the position. I do find it just trying to picture Mordecai and him presenting himself as he did, and just how what he would look like, and how that would have just that how people would see that and see that like day after day, and what went through their mind. And so like, man, something's going on. I can't imagine people being oblivious and not understanding his plight, but we just don't know. But how much different we would be if we mimicked Mordecai when it comes to sin, and not just our own, but just sin in general, and try to do something about it, and seek to implore others to make a change, to do something about the evil, destructive nature of sin. So much could be done differently if Christians could step up and just have that mentality of, people are dying, or people are sentenced to death because they are in their sin, and we should be sorrowful for that. And our motivation and our desire is saying like, hey, you need to get out of that life. You need to do something, make a change, um, do something before it's too late. And that's just some thoughts that came to mind. But let's finish this last section, which is so very powerful and connects back to our principal verses. Beginning in verse 13 says, Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, Go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, or for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way, and thus I will go in to the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. So uh, we're now into this section of really getting to the heart of, you kind of get to the sense that even though God's not mentioned, that he's really in control. You really get a sense that Mordecai believes this, that whether or not you are going to be willing, which I hope you will, Esther, to step up, because it seems to me clearly that you were allowed to be in this position for this purpose, to do something to save your people. And if you're not, you may not be able to escape what's coming. Don't think that you're just because you're wearing the crown now that somehow you will not find death because of this. But and who knows? You got a sense that Mordecai has faith that things will work out for the best. That this is that not all is lost. Um, that even though again it's not specified, that God is somehow working behind the scenes and is still very much control, that there is still a hope out there for the Jews, but the hope that Mordecai is looking as like Esther, it seems like so clear to me that you are where you're at, where you need to be. You just need to be willing to step up. And um, what Esther does doesn't seem like an unreasonable request of, look, let's take some time to really devote the fasting. It doesn't say prayer, but I can only imagine there's got to be some prayer going on during this time, because fasting and prayer are so intertwined throughout Scripture. It's like they go hand in hand, especially with those that were followers of God. Um, and to be able to say that, okay, we're not going to rely on our own strength to do this. We're going to look out something outside of ourselves, because this is something that we're completely powerless over, and we have no control over the outcome. And I think Esther's got to build up confidence and strength. And it's really strange to go without food. That's going to deplete your strength. But it seems like when we go and seek God, and when people go in, and we look at examples in the past, fasting, prayer, that's when we really find our strength. And it's rather ironic, but it's something that we need. And she now has sort of a now resolve finally, and it's finally starting to sink in. Okay, I'm willing to do this. Um, and if it is my time, it is my time. It's starting to really sink in, and she's getting that sober minded and clarity of thought. And last thing I'll add is uh, Mordecai. Um, you just go to shows that he too is a servant because he went about telling the people to go and do as Esther requested, the other Jews. So that would have been quite a task as well, because he could have just stayed where he was staying. So he sort of got a little bit, you think, of hope that there is some movement finally happen. And that would, I think, give me some hope that, hey, not all is lost. And when we hear such news of, or if we were presented with such news, probably the reaction would be, okay, let's just, we're sealed. Our destiny is sealed. There's no point in doing anything. But we're seeing the exact opposite. We're doing what we can, and we're not just sitting on our hands. We are we're looking to the one that who has the power to make things happen, and not rely on our own strength. Chris, your thoughts?
Think it's interesting, that the time's come for her to really do what she was put in this role to do. And like I said, she's kind of at a crossroads where she has to make a decision. You go before the king, which is against the law, and you potentially die. You keep quiet, and Mordecai and your people die. And like you brought up, Andrew, something's going to come. At some point, someone's going to ask the question of where Esther's from. Evidently, this question has not been asked yet. But we all are asked that question, like, where are you from? Where'd you grow up? What do you believe? Like at some point, you would think someone would ask her that question. Maybe Mordecai's hinting to that. Do you think that you're going to escape too? Or he may be mentioning Vashti again. That could be a reference to Vashti. The previous queen didn't escape. We talked about that earlier. She died because she didn't do what the king told her to do. Do you think that you're going to escape as well? It's like you think of Mordecai raising Esther. He watched Esther become the woman that she had become. She is put in this position. And really, he's not very delicate with this conversation, which kind of shows you the seriousness of the situation. It's like, if you don't do it, you're going to perish. But what I think is so fascinating in verses 13 and 14 that have been our principal verse. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise from the Jews from another place. So with Mordecai at the beginning that we looked at in chapter 4, it's doom and gloom. He won't accept the garments. He won't accept the removal of the sackcloth. It's like, oh, it's the end of the world. Well, he tells Esther here, if you won't do it, someone will arise and will deliver us. Well, I think once again, God's not mentioned by name, but I believe Mordecai probably had a good understanding of Jewish history, God fighting for his people, those things being passed down. God is going to protect us. If you will not do it, if you do not do what you know is right, you're going to suffer consequences from it. And once again, it's like I'd mentioned with Mordecai, you feel that sense of guilt. Let's say Esther doesn't go into the king and tell the king and reveal this information to the king. Let's say she doesn't beg for mercy. She's going to have to live the rest of her days knowing that she knew what she should have done and did not do it, which is a heavy weight for a person to bear. And I think that with Mordecai, what's so interesting about this is when we're introduced to Mordecai and Esther, Mordecai is telling Esther what to do. Don't tell anybody don't tell anybody who you are or where you come from. He's commanding her and telling her to do stuff. Well, you get to the end of chapter 4, she's now telling Mordecai, You go and fast for 3 days, gather the people and fast for 3 days. I will too. And then as we see at the end, what she says, then I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. I think that is one of the most, and this book is a very underrated book. I'm glad that we've gone through Ruth and we're going through this one as well. But that might be one of the most powerful statements of the whole Bible that she just made. If I perish, I perish. If I die, I die. But I know that I'm doing the right thing by doing this. And you think about that, that's really a good attitude for us to have as Christians. You know, it's talked about multiple times in the New Testament. You know, Christ talks in Matthew 10, verse 28. Don't fear those who can kill the body, but, you know, fear the one who can take your soul. And I'm paraphrasing there. And Paul talks about the idea of dying as gain. You know, what's the point of living a life if you're not doing what's right? You know, what's the point of living a life if you're not fulfilling your purpose? This is her purpose. This is the reason that she's in the position she's in. And I think it says a lot about her that she's willing to accept that. You know, she could have said, well, you know, you're deranged, Mordecai. I'm not doing this. I'm not breaking the law. I'm not gonna put myself in this situation. You know, you're the one that made Haman mad. You have to face the consequences. But no, she says, if I perish, I perish. And that's so powerful. Very, very powerful statement that she makes. And I'm sure Mordecai, in a sense, before I pass it on to you, Eric, I'm not a parent yet, but in a sense, Mordecai had to feel some type of emotion there of maybe swelling up in his heart of that's my cousin Esther who I raised. I'm privileged enough to know this person and I was able to raise this person. And I'm sure in a sense to him, he probably felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and thankfulness and even a sense of being proud of her for rising to this occasion. And, you know, the scriptures don't reveal that stuff, but you know, it's human nature. You have to wonder what he felt in that moment. But ultimately, I think he knew and understood God was going to take care of things. Even if Esther was unable to rise to that occasion, God was in control, which I think is something that we all need to be thinking about. We got Eric.
Well, you said a lot of things I was gonna say. I'll just kind of give maybe two comments. One, she becomes brave. Bravery is doing the right thing, not without fear, but because you are afraid and nevertheless being able to do it, pushing yourself to do it. So she's a great example of bravery and courage. But she did need a little help. Mordecai kind of pushed her a little bit. And sometimes we need help from other people. We need our brothers and sisters to encourage us and help us to make the brave decision to be people of courage, and to be people of mettle, and people who are willing to do what's right even when it's difficult. The one who knows the right thing to do and doesn't do it, to him it is a sin. James 4:17 tells us this is a great example of that. And then the second thing is just thinking about where Esther has come from. She was an orphan. And now she faces the prospect of, if she doesn't say anything, she's going to be orphaned from her entire people. So it just imagine sort of the dealing of the trauma and the dealing of the baggage of all of that, and facing that prospect. She really was in a difficult place. And it's hard to make good decisions when you're in a difficult place. I mean, all of us have made bad decisions because we've been stressed, because we've been dealing with our own baggage, because we've been whatever. But she makes the right decision. She makes the right call. She needs a little encouragement. We need that too. She makes the right call. And I do like that reversal too that Chris brought out, that earlier in the chapter, it's Mordecai trying to tell Esther what to do. And then Esther, by the end of the chapter, is telling Mordecai what to do, and they end up doing it. And I'm looking forward to chapter 5, where you start seeing the rubber hit the road. So thank you guys for your comments and everything.
I'll close with this. John 15, verse 13. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. And so that was Jesus speaking. And example here, perfect correlation given. And great discussion. Looking forward to what's going to transpire in chapter 5. We hope that what we've talked about glorify God, and we hope that what we've talked about is encourage you to open up and dig deeper into God's word. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have questions, whether it be what we talked about in this episode or any of our other videos, but most importantly, what it means to live a life for Jesus and live that life faithfully, because we just want to make sure that we are doing what we need to do on this side of eternity to be welcomed into the eternal home of heaven. And that should be our desire. And so thank you so much for tuning in. You can find us on our website at TaylesvilleRDChurchOfChrist.com or at the Taylesville Road Church of Christ Facebook page. Don't hesitate to reach out. But we hope, Lord willing, we'll be back for another episode of Three Guys in the Word. But until then, may God bless you and take care.